is the number of experiments you
Yeah.
run doesn't matter. The purpose of experimentation is not to run more experiments, it's to enable better decisions.
Howdy, folks. It's Rich and Joe. It's been a while, but I'm back on the Experimentation podcast. Today, I've got Manuel Da Costa, all the way from UK. He heads up effective experiments, and he's been in the experimentation game for about 15 years. And yeah, welcome to the show, Manuel.
Hey Richard, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, awesome. Look, I think I was interested in reaching out to you because I think I have when I was learning CRO years ago. I think your one of your courses was one of the ones. Sorry, your platform that you've created for recording experiments and those sort of things. I think that was mentioned on this course that I was doing years ago, um, although I've never tried it, it sort of piqued my mind that recording our experiments and seeing trends and those sort of things is very important. We can't just rely on Google Sheets. So before we get into how you came up with your platform and those sort of things, you've been in the experimentation game for what 10, 15 years, quite a varied history. So I'd just like to know a bit about your background, how you got into the dark arts of experimentation, and what keeps you here?
Absolutely. So my journey, before I got into the experimentation space, I started off with, the more general web design, web development, then into internet marketing and SEO. And then after that point, uh, I came across something called the Lean Startup. It was a book by Eric Ries. It was around the time I was kind of interested in startups and building products. And Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, was built on the concept of the minimum viable product and the build, measure, learn cycle. And in doing so, I applied those principles to my own startup of validating uh, validating it and trying to understand how we could get these ideas as MVPs out into the market. I ran the Lean Startup Conference in Europe and really connected with a broader audience out there. I hadn't heard of conversion optimization at that point, but when I
Yeah,
did, it felt like this is exactly the same thing. It makes
yeah, it
total
is.
sense. It's
Yeah,
A/B testing is such a powerful way of validation because you've got the data that can back up your insights. And I started consulting on that after a few years, and that was the entry point into that world of conversion optimization. I worked with quite a few companies at the time, and through my network, I learned a lot as well. And it was
mm,
around this time, around 2014, where I started experiencing a challenge, which was about managing all these different clients I had with different spreadsheets and different tools and different um, setups. So much so that it was costing me time and effort to really understand what was happening in these different programs. And the idea for effective experiments came about. So that was where we'll talk about effective experiments later, but really
yeah.
that was where the consultant became the product, essentially.
So you kind of went full circle. You went from you read the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. I read that in 2013, and that did actually shift my mind a lot to like viewing um startups as like you've got an MVP, and it's basically like you're launching, like your startup is kind of like an experiment that you launch out into the public, and then you gather data from the public, and then you pivot according to the feedback from the public, and so you basically get into a, what do you call it, a launch what do you call it, a test, launch, learn, and
Build, measure, learn.
iterate sort of. Yeah, build, measure, learn, that's it.
Yeah,
Which is essentially what we do in experimentation anyway. It's a lot of pretty much you have sprints, and so it's a lot of the same sort of meta skills, isn't it? That
Exactly,
very
and that's what really appealed to me
transferable
about the
skills.
CRO space when I came into it.
Yeah.
It was how similar it was, but also how it added a lot more rigor to it. The hypothesis-driven releases, the hypothesis-driven um, experiments, that was really what captured my imagination about it.
My name is Romo Santiago, founder of Experimentation. Our new book, Prove It or Lose It, the mostly no nonsense guide to surviving experimentation program drama, is out now. Find it at experimentation.com and all major bookstores today.
Mm. And I'm guessing you saw, just to get a bit more into the details of effective experiments. So did you? I'm guessing, like when a person's doing like a backlog of experiments and they're prioritizing it and then they put it into a roadmap. Um, a lot of people on this show, maybe if they're working in like a small to medium type business, or they're doing a couple of experiments a month, or they're in an organization that's fairly immature when it comes to experiments. They might just be relying on Google Sheets, where you've got like you just got a template with the columns and your backlog and your roadmap. I guess you saw that could only go so far, and I'm guessing that you developed a tool to kind of like you sort of had that light bulb moment where you were like, hey, instead of like dealing with spreadsheets and all these sort of things, why don't we just create some software programs to um, instead of like basically make it more seamless? Is that correct? Could you sort of get more insights into that?
Yeah, correct. So the effective experiments when it first came out was essentially a
Mm,
consolidation of all the different practices of experimentation in one place. So whereas people were using Google Sheets, for example, to manage a backlog of ideas, a tool like Trello back in the day to manage
yeah.
the workflow, and then PowerPoint and a road mapping software, and then there's also the thing about keeping all these tools in sync with each other, and the overhead of keeping everyone informed about it. So effective experiments um, uh, was this all-in-one centralized experimentation management platform as it started out as. Over time, it has
And I'm
evolved, and I
guessing
will
like
also tell you how it's going to evolve in the next phase. But that's where that journey started.
yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm guessing you basically applied those same principles that you learned from um in Eric Rees's book and your CRO journey, to iterate your own product, right? I'm guessing what it was 10 years ago is quite different to what it is now, right? Like you were,
Absolutely. Like the industry has evolved. You've got a lot
yeah,
of companies, a wider range of like organizations doing experimentation. And
yeah,
so yeah, when we if we look at the industry maturity from the point of how many organizations are doing it, a lot more have done it. So we're still kind of at that place of helping these kind of companies move from different levels of maturity.
yeah, it's pretty cool. Um, yeah, look, it's probably something I need to go go into myself because we're just using sheets, but yeah, I can see how unwieldy they can be, and yeah, I might need to go on effective experiments one day. Um, so yeah, so you've been around it for a while, and I know you put out like some posts recently. It was to do with kind of alluding to what you call the trust gap, and I know before the show we are talking about like maybe one of your main frustrations you see is there's this gap between experimentation output that experimentation teams
Yeah,
will have, and so they're outputting these tests and coming up with hey, we did 50 tests this quarter or whatever, and here's the outputs, and then there's a gap between that and the senior execs or C suites who are making these business decisions. Can you maybe explain a bit more about that, and how it alludes to your blog post that you put up on LinkedIn recently?
Absolutely. So over the last 10 years of running effective experiments, I've literally had a
Yeah.
front row seat. And working with companies across different continents, varying sizes and varying maturity levels, I've really come to understand the dynamics of experimentation from what I'd
Mm.
consider myself as an in-between, because I'm not fully within the experimentation practitioner space because I'm on the vendor side, if you call that. But I'm
Yeah.
also connected deeply with the stakeholders as well. So I'm somewhere in the middle, and I can see the dynamics over time. And one thing that kept happening year on year on year was the fact that I could see experimentation teams full of enthusiasm, full of energy, running these really good experiments, coming up with really good insights that could really make some big business change, right? But then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, these insights and these results, they disappear into the ether. The senior leadership is not taking action on it. In fact, you're getting pushback from the CTO or the CPO. And then you've got this whole talk about the hippos, right? As the
Yeah.
specialists call them, the hippos keep wanting to do their own things. And what this is something that I am calling the trust gap. And the trust gap
Trust gap.
is this big chasm between experimentation insights and results on one side and actual business decisions on the other side. And
Yeah.
the reason this happens over time, the reason why this happens, I'll go into that in a second. But I
Yeah.
just want to talk about one thing that Spiro found in their benchmark recently, in the 2025 benchmark.
Yeah.
And in that, they said only 12% of programs are truly transformative. And that means 88% are still struggling out there. And they list the challenges that experimentation specialists face, which is lack of buy-in, lack of trust in the results, lack of being seen as strategic advisors, right? And so what we're seeing is all these experimentation programs kind of going through their paces, but they're not really delivering what I feel experimentation should truly achieve, which is business decisions. And so
Yeah.
this trust gap, over the last few years, I've been revisiting my own thinking about the industry. And what I'm putting out now, as you saw on LinkedIn, is a culmination of all these years of thinking, which is this pattern is not new, though. I actually looked at a webinar deck that I had done back in 2018, and similar problems were there. So if similar problems are there year on year on year,
Mm.
what are we doing differently? Are we do and here's the challenge I see with the experimentation industry as a whole. I don't think that we have a tools problem or a people problem, right? This is the threat to experimentation isn't bad tools or poor statistical significance. It is actually the advice that's being given that sounds really well-meaning, but it's actually keeping specialists trapped in their organizations as tactical tacticians rather than strategic advisors that they really should be. I believe
Mm.
experimentation specialists should be strategic advisors. That's where they should be elevated to, right? If leadership has a question about how do we achieve certain things in our business model, in our pricing, and our marketing strategy, right?
Yeah.
Bring in the experimentation people to help us with it. That's how it should be. But what's happening is experimentation specialists are relegated to a silo, right? And what has happened now is
Mm.
a massive echo chamber has resulted, has come about as a result. And this echo chamber, you have specialists that congregate on LinkedIn, at conferences, and they keep repeating the same advice, right? And the advice is a bit like this: it's let's let's focus on being likable, so stakeholders won't sabotage our program. Let's continue showing progress, even if there's no meaningful impact. Let's build some trophy case studies so that when they come and question us, we can point to that and we can show them here's the case studies we've got, so we can prove our
Yeah.
worth. And we need to master office politics because experimentation is inherently political, right? And here's the
Yeah.
kicker, right? Expect to be blamed for everything and prepare defensive strategies. In psychology, there are terms for this, and this is what we call
Yeah.
survival mindset, right? So what this advice, again, as I said, it's well-meaning, but
Yeah.
it's telling people to survive in a broken system rather than to fix the system. Because the system is inherently broken, so the problems that keep coming up are essentially the same year on year on year. I remember talking to you about this pre-call, and you laughed and said, I actually relate to that. You'd be surprised how many people relate to that every time I speak to them in private, right?
Yeah.
But it's a different persona in on social media and at conferences because you see a different reality. And I call that like the Instagram version of experimentation because everyone's, you know, quite gung ho about their results and how many experiments they ran, etc. And
Yeah.
then they'll also joke about it in their own little bubble where they'll laugh about, oh, leadership doesn't understand stats or they don't understand data. We should show them more data and then they'll care. Or let them run bad experiments and then they'll know our worth. But really what that's doing is it's really keeping specialists
Mm.
stuck in a mindset of an us versus them mentality, right? So this is what I'm seeing, and the solution to this is not better tools or better people or better skills. This is not a people problem, a skills problem, or a tools problem. This is a governance problem. It's how
Mm.
experimentation is positioned, right? And if you look at how experimentation is positioned, it's brought on fairly later on. It's brought on as a pilot program because the leadership want to see results because they've been sold on this idea that experimentation is all about win rates, it's all about number of experiments, and it's all about revenue. Those are
Yeah.
important, but in doing so, it's also trapping specialists in this narrative that those are the only things that can prove their worth. We all celebrate learnings, right? If I tell you the purpose of experimentation is learning, everyone nods. They're like, yeah, we get it, we get it. Learnings are important. But there's that trust gap again. You come up with insights, but no one knows about the insights and no one's making decisions from those insights. So what are those learnings worth? We can't be celebrating
Mm.
velocity and we can't be celebrating conversion uplifts if they don't make any difference to the actual decisions that are being made within a company. So I'll be even bold saying this: the number of experiments
Yeah.
you run doesn't matter. The purpose of experimentation is not to run more experiments; it's to enable better decisions. Companies fire the agency they're working with, or they disband their
Yeah.
team, or they get laid off, right? Why would a company
Do you
lay
think?
off an experimentation team if they're so vital to that organization? And the reason why they're not seen as strategic advisors is because of that trust gap disconnect.
Do you think
So I'll
part of the
pause here,
reason
Richard.
why?
Check out your thoughts.
No. I think. Do you think part of the reason for the issue is like maybe how it's marketed and sold? Like, like I won't mention all the A/B testing tools, but like the way they sell themselves is, you know, it's okay. It's because the stakeholders might see an ad on LinkedIn or whatever, and they just think, okay, it's we've got this cool A/B testing tool, and that's all CRO is. It's just A/B testing to
Correct.
find your way to get winners and bring in more money. And yes, there is that aspect there, but I think the learnings aspect of experimentation doesn't get. I think it's harder to sell. Um, you know, just from a marketing perspective, like it's a harder thing to sell. Like the learnings, how we made, because how your A/B test can make or a better user experience for your users, and you know I guess if you're like an executive, you're thinking more in terms of dollars and cents and revenue because that's probably what your KPIs are based on, and maybe that's just how like how these tools have marketed themselves, and maybe that's part of the problem too. What do you think? What
That
are your
is
thoughts
definitely
on that?
part of the problem,
Um,
right? If you think of testing tools, what is their primary KPI?
yeah,
As a testing tool, they want you to run more tests because if you run more tests, it justifies the need for a software like theirs, right? And testing tools
yeah,
are
and, and,
required, but
and, and to
again,
pay and to pay for it too, right? Yeah,
correct. You
yeah,
got to pay for the number of tests, volume, etc., right? So that's one issue. The second issue, which you said, learnings are
mm,
not seen as valuable. Now there is a loop that people get caught in. There's lots of talks of loops, which I'll which I'll talk about. But there is a loop that
yeah, yeah,
practitioners get caught in, and we've even experimented on how to break them out of that loop, and I'll give you that strategy right now. So the first strategy is
yeah,
how are learnings presented, right? If you look at a majority of experimentation teams, they will present massive PowerPoint documents with every experiment they've run, or they'll send a spreadsheet which aggregate everything and pass it on. And what we've seen when we work with stakeholders is they will look at it and it gets forgotten about after some time, right? No one knows anything about it. And we tried this strategy with one of our clients initially, and then we advised other clients to try it out as well. And we said the next time you
yeah,
go into your meeting, right? If those PowerPoints are not getting the the attention you want, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go in
yeah,
and instead of showing 50 slides, I want you to present one slide. And in that one slide, there are 5 statements in plain English or whatever language you need to present it in, but simple, understandable, and actionable, right? Those are the key things.
yeah,
Across all these experiments, these are the trends we found, these are the insights we found. And the insight statement is written simply for the benefit of the stakeholder to understand it, right? Now, once they present it and it catches the attention of anyone, then you can deep dive into it and you can talk about how you address the problem and how you solve the problem through an experiment. The hero of this is not the experiment, it's not the specialist, it is the insight. The insight shows the value and it connects it to the individual stakeholder. And then from there,
mm,
you can invite the stakeholder to address that insight and see how it would affect their decision making. Because once you connect the dots,
yeah,
it's better. But the problem, as I said earlier, is the advice that goes out in specialist circles is all about keeping it quite specialist focused, quite technical focused, it's a lot of jargon, it's a lot about p-values and stats. And people feel
yeah,
really important when they talk about it because it's complex, it's really it makes them look really smart, but really the best thing you can do is to dumb it down so even your
yeah,
grandmother could understand it, right? And if you can do that, it makes your complexities even more valuable because then you can expand that world to them and you can show it to them, right? That's how learnings become valuable because it's not just that a learning on its own is um, good or bad or valuable or invaluable. You have to make it work. And this is actually one of the core problems that we see when it comes to experimentation, which increases the trust gap. So you have experiments that are successful, that get pushed forward, experiments with learnings or failures that get pushed back. And there's no system that informs everyone in a predictable way. So when we did work
mm,
around this over the last few years, we came up with this framework called the learning loop. And the
yeah,
learning loop is really there to address this entire mismatch of expectations, these issues that experimentation teams face on an ongoing basis, and the C-level face on an ongoing basis when it comes to the value of experimentation as well. So if you look at it as a continuous loop, the first step of this loop is strategic direction. And it starts off clearly with the business setting the remit for experimentation and what is required from it. What questions need to be answered? What ROI, what value needs to be derived from it? What are the key
yeah,
business initiatives? If you don't have this, you will be running experiments like spray and pray. You won't be running good experiments. You'll just be running button color tests, quick things that will show activity, or we ran 10 tests or 50 tests or whatever. But if it's not connected to the business, you've already lost it, right? The second
Yeah.
step is governance and structure. Now, this ties in with one of the challenges we have been trying to solve with effective experiments, which is, you're right, people are using tools like Google Sheets and Airtable and so on and so forth, but these tools are good for managing projects and tasks. An experiment is not a task. An experiment is a living, breathing piece of knowledge that can be utilized across the business. But the way it's managed, so I've seen people, document an experiment long after it's finished, or they will only document the bare bones, or they will document it only for their own purpose rather than it being for the stakeholder, right? So
Yeah.
the governance and structure ensures that everything is done correctly. Knowledge creation is where all the ideas, the research, and the experiments happen. That's the third step. Then from that point onwards, what's the purpose of that knowledge and creation? It's implementation and action. And this is where the actions are not just done on the level of the practitioners and the specialists. It's the actions and the implementations that are done on the more senior level. And it's the visibility of that as well. And then the final thing is what we call insight reuse. Do those insights facilitate new ideas? Do those insights facilitate bigger decisions? Do those insights facilitate new pieces of research? And that's what we call organizational learning. So this learning loop feeds, one feeds into the other, and you need every aspect of it. So it's a system rather than it being a prescription. Like, do it this way, and that's the only way. But within that, you can really form your own your own ways of working as well, right? And
Can I ask you a question? Does it rely on the practitioners, the experimenters, and the C suites, like pretty much getting on the same level? Like they kind of have to. Like it
you
sounds
need,
like it's like if you before you even going to run an experimentation program, it sounds like they've all got to be in the same room and talk to each other and be like, hey, okay, what's the business North Star metrics, and how does our experimentation team align to these metrics? Whereas I don't know, like, because I'm just sort of thinking, like, what if say the CRO program's been running for 2-3 years, it's still kind of immature and still at the stage where it's just this tactical A/B testing machine, but isn't really. There's still that gap. That gap exists. Like, yeah, my point is, it sounds like this is easier to do at the inception of an experimentation program as opposed to something that's already been running for a while. That's my thoughts. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if something's been running for a while, the question, as you said,
Yeah,
is it achieving that, or are you running into the same problems, right? If you're running into the same
yeah.
problems, then the thing here is to take a hard reset on it. It's to say, actually, we're going around in circles. Let's take stock. Now, we can't change culture. This is the another myth that I want to really tackle. People talk about building
Yeah.
experimentation culture, and really what they mean is we're running more experiments. There's no such thing as an experimentation culture, because for that to happen, it requires a top-down level change, and we're not seeing that right now, right?
Yeah.
What needs to happen is, you're right, the senior leadership and the experimentation teams need to be in the same room. They need to be discussing and setting that remit, and they need to be getting on the same page with that. Now, in the absence of that, right, let's say this experimentation team's been running for 2 or 3 years. They're still tactical. They've not become strategic. What's the first thing you can do on that front? The first thing is to make sure that you have time for every single stakeholder and understand what their actual KPIs and goals are. It may not be formally given to you, but if you can derive some of their challenges and their goals, and then every experiment you run, you connect it to those goals, right? So now imagine a different way of reporting a different way of reporting is you talk to a CPO, you talk to a CMO, and you say, these are your initiatives for the quarter. Here's how all our experimentation activity ties into it. Now let's see if we can make any decisions on the back of that. And you've already got step one completed over there, right? Now, I don't want to go into it in too much detail because we're only here for a short amount of time. So
Yep.
I'm happy to, set up another session for anyone interested in this. But really, this learning loop is key for experimentation to thrive, not just survive. I talked about that survival mindset earlier, and people are really struggling with it. So we need to really get out of the survival mindset and start
Mm.
making a change. And what we've done now, just one last thing that I want to talk about
Yep.
is I know
No,
we
cool.
introduced effective experiments as a start, but if this is going out in the near future, effective experiments is now evolving into Efestra, a governance platform for experimentation that is built around this learning loop system. It's meant to connect the C-level with experimentation and decision making all in one go. So, but if anyone's interested, they can check us out in the show notes. I assume
Yep.
we'll put in some of the details.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, usually, yeah, thanks for your insights. And we have to wrap it up. But how can people get in touch with you, Manuel, and reach out to you after this podcast and ask you questions and whatnot?
Absolutely. So the best way to reach out to me is connect with me on LinkedIn. As you know, I'm quite vocal on LinkedIn. I post quite regularly.
Yep.
So just slide into my DMs there. That'll be great. You can also
Cool.
check out efestra.com. That'll be our new website, and you can drop us a line on there as well. But really, we want experimentation to thrive. Our main mission is to make experimentation a key decision driver in organizations, and that's why we're here.
Mm.
So thank you, Richard, for inviting me and letting me speak.
No, thanks for enlightening us about I guess kind of like your vision of where experimentation should go to, and it looks like you've already repurposed your platform to kind of jump to where you want it to go to, right? Like where it should optimally go to towards more of a governance type model as opposed to just being the silo that does all their wacky weird experiments.
Correct. And I think there's so much evolution that needs to happen in this industry, and I think if it does, I can definitely see in a few years that experimentation specialists will be elevated from just being tactical um, test runners to being more strategic advisors because they can close
Yeah.
that gap, right, between all the different parts of this loop. But yeah, I'll send you some more resources. Maybe you can put that in the show notes and
Yep.
for
Cool.
anyone to read it as well.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
My name is Romo Santiago, founder of Experimentation. Our new book, Prove It or Lose It, the mostly no-nonsense guide to surviving experimentation program drama is out now. Find it at experimentation.com and all major bookstores today.